Samson the Strong Man, Judges 13-16. The book of Judges tells about times when Israel disobeyed God. During this time, God used judges to be the leaders of his people. In this lesson, we will talk about Samson, a judge who was a very strong man, but he did not make good choices in serving God. Who is the strongest man you know? Your dad? Your uncle? This is Marush Puriaski. He is 5'11", and he is 310 pounds. He won the Strongest Man of the World contest, and he won that title 5 times. In this lesson, we are going to study about Samson, a man who, if he were alive today, would win the Strongest Man of the Year contest. He was the 12th judge of Israel. This lesson is found in the book of Judges. Judges is the second group of books in the Old Testament called the historical books. These books begin with Joshua and go through Esther. Let's say these books: Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Once again, the Israelites started worshiping idols and disobeying God. They were doing wrong in God's sight. Because of their sin, God allowed for them to be subject for 40 years to their enemy, the Philistines. The Philistines stole food and crops from the people and treated them very badly. The Philistines, who lived along the southern coast, had 5 large cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, Ekron, and Ashdod. Near the Philistine territory, in the town of Zorah, lived a man called Manoah and his wife. They had not been able to have children. One day, the angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and said, "Even though you have been unable to have children, you will soon give birth to a son. You must not eat grapes or raisins, drink wine, or any other alcoholic drink, or eat any forbidden food. Your son's hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines." When she told her husband Manoah the good news, he prayed, "Lord, please let the man of God come back to us again and give us more instructions about this son who is to be born." The angel of God appeared once again to Manoah's wife as she was sitting in the field, but her husband Manoah was not with her. So she hurried to tell her husband, saying, "He is here, the man who appeared to me the other day." Manoah got up and followed his wife. When he came to the man, Manoah asked, "When is the boy going to be born, and what rules should govern his life?" The angel of God repeated the instructions that he had given to Manoah's wife. "What is your name?" asked Manoah. "It's too wonderful for you to understand," the angel of the Lord replied. Then Manoah took a young goat and a grain offering and offered it on a rock as a sacrifice to the Lord. As the flames from the altar shot up toward the sky, the angel of the Lord ascended in the fire. Manoah and his wife fell with their faces to the ground. At first, they were very afraid, but then they realized that the angel of God had accepted their offering and wanted to tell them what was going to happen. Sometime later, the son they had been promised was born. They named him Samson. They were very careful to obey God's instructions, and they never allowed Samson's hair to be cut. The Lord blessed Samson as he grew up, and the Spirit of God stirred in him. His hair was not cut, and he did not drink wine or eat forbidden food. God helped Samson to grow to be very strong so that he could protect Israel from the Philistines. One day, Samson went down to the town of Timnah, and he saw a young Philistine girl. She caught his eye. He returned home and demanded, "I want to marry a young Philistine woman in Timnah. Get her for me." God had told his people not to marry people who didn't know and love him. But Samson wanted to marry her anyway. Samson wanted his own way instead of God's. That was not a good choice. Samson's parents did not like Samson's idea. They knew it was wrong for Samson to marry a Philistine. His mother and father objected. "Isn't there even one woman in our tribe or among all the Israelites you could marry?" they asked. "Why must you go to the pagan Philistine to find a wife?" Samson refused to listen to them, demanding that the marriage be arranged. Although they could not convince him to do right, Samson and his parents did go down to Timnah to plan the wedding. They didn't know that God was going to use the situation to kill some Philistines who were harshly ruling over them. When Samson was walking by himself, a young lion suddenly attacked him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he ripped the lion's jaws apart with his bare hands. Later, when Samson returned, he turned off the path to look at the carcass of the lion. He found that a swarm of bees had made some honey in the carcass, and so he scooped up some of the honey into his hands and ate it. But wait, Samson was not supposed to touch a dead animal, let alone eat honey from it. He was disobeying God again. As part of the wedding ceremony, Samson gave a feast at Timnah for all the men in the wedding party. There were 30 young men that came to the party. The men were very rowdy and they drank a lot, and soon they began to tell jokes. Soon Samson began to join in with them, and he told them a riddle that he had made up about the lion he had killed. Samson announced, "Let me tell you a riddle. If you solve it during these 7 days of the celebration, I will give you 30 fine sets of festive clothing. But if you can't solve it, then you must give me 30 fine linen robes and 30 sets of festive clothing." They agreed. Samson put the riddle to them. Out of the one who eats came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. The men tried and tried to think of the answer, but they couldn't. 3 days later, they were still trying to figure it out. Finally, on the fourth day, they went to see the girl that Samson was marrying. They said to her, "Entice your husband to explain the riddle for us, or we will burn your father's house with you in it. Did you invite us to this party just to rob us and make us poor?" So Samson's wife came to him in tears. She cried and cried for 7 days and said, "You don't love me. You hate me. You have given my people a riddle, but you have not told me the answer." At first, Samson refused. She kept crying and nagging Samson for the remainder of the feast. On the last day of the feast, Samson finally gave in to her pressure and told her the answer. She immediately betrayed him and told the men. Of course, the men told Samson the answer to the riddle. Just before the sunset of the seventh day, the men of the town came to Samson with their answer. "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" Samson replied, If you hadn't put pressure on my wife to betray me, you wouldn't have solved my riddle." Samson was very angry, and then the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on Samson. He went down to the enemy town of Ashdod and killed 30 men, took their belongings, and gave their clothing to the men who had solved his riddle. Now, although Samson was acting in revenge, God was using it to kill more of the enemy Philistines. Samson had disobeyed God about who to marry, and now he had lots more trouble. Samson was furious about what had happened. He left his wedding celebrations to return home to his parents. Later on, during the wheat harvest, Samson took a present of a young goat to his wife. Her father would not let Samson in and explained that he thought Samson hated her. So he had given her in marriage to his best man. He offered to give Samson another of his daughters in marriage instead. The girl's father said, "Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead." Well, this really made Samson furious. He said, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them now." Samson was allowing his own lust to control him. Samson went out and he caught 300 foxes. He tied their tails together in pairs and fastened a torch to each pair of tails. Then he lit the torches and let the foxes run through the grain fields of the Philistines. The tied-up tails made those foxes run around in circles. Everywhere the foxes ran, they would set things on fire. They ran in the fields and burned up all the grain. So Samson burned all the Philistines' grain to the ground, including the sheaves and the uncut grain. He also destroyed their vineyards and olive groves. Samson did not have any regard for the property of others. Of course, this made the Philistines very angry. "Who did this?" the Philistines demanded. "Samson," was the reply, "because his father-in-law gave Samson's wife to be married to his best man." So the Philistines went and got the girl Samson was to have married and her father and burned them to death. When Samson heard what had happened, he vowed, "I won't rest until I take my revenge on you." So he attacked the Philistines with great fury, killing many of them. Then Samson went to live in a cave in the rock of Elim. Now, no doubt Samson was feeling sorry for himself. Instead of being a good judge, as God had called him, he was making mistake after mistake. The Philistines heard that Samson was nearby, so they retaliated by setting up camp in Judah and spreading out near the town of Lehi. The men of Judah asked the Philistines, "Why are you attacking us?" The Philistines replied, "We've come to capture Samson and pay him back for what he did to us." So 3,000 men of Judah sent down to get Samson at the cave in Elim. They said to Samson, "Don't you realize the Philistines rule over us? What are you doing to us?" Samson replied, "I only did to them what they did to me." "We have come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines," the men of Judah told Samson. Well, when they promised not to kill him, Samson allowed them to tie him up with 2 new ropes. As Samson arrived at Lehi, the Philistines shouted in triumph. But the Spirit of the Lord made Samson so powerful, he snapped the ropes on his arms as if they were burnt strands of flax, and they fell from his wrists. Samson picked up the jawbone of a dead donkey and killed 1,000 Philistines with it. It was an unbelievable battle. One man fighting 1,000 men, and Samson won. Samson shouted, "With the jawbone of a donkey, I've piled them in heaps." The place was named Jawbone Hill. After this battle, Samson was really thirsty from his efforts. So the Lord caused water to gush from a hollow in the ground at Lehi. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he was revived. Samson then became a judge of Israel for 20 years during the days of the Philistines. One day, Samson went to the city of Gaza, where he met another Philistine girl. When the people of Gaza found out that Samson was in their town, they surrounded the place where he was staying, and they were going to wait for him all night so they could kill him. But Samson got up in the middle of the night and took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the 2 posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his strong shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faced Hebron. Samson was a big, strong man. Nobody could stop him. But Samson had still not learned to obey God completely. Sometime later, Samson fell in love with another Philistine woman. Her name was Delilah. Delilah was a Philistine woman who lived in the valley of Sorek, near Samson's hometown of Zorah. Now, you would have thought that Samson had learned his lesson the last time he fell in love with a Philistine girl, but he hadn't. He was acting foolishly again. The rulers of the Philistines went to Delilah and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. If you do this, each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." Now, all this silver would make Delilah very rich. So Delilah asked Samson, "Please tell me what makes you so strong and what it would take to tie you up securely." Samson replied, "If I were tied up with 7 new bowstrings, I would become as weak as anyone else." Now, Samson was beginning to allow himself to be tricked by Delilah. He forgot that his special strength was from God. The Philistine rulers brought Delilah 7 new bowstrings, and she tied Samson up with them. She also hid men in one of the inner rooms of her house. And then she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." But Samson snapped the bowstrings as string snaps when it is burned by fire. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Samson really thought that he was invincible. He was forgetting that his strength was a gift from God. "You've been making fun of me and telling lies," Delilah told Samson. "Now please tell me how you can be tied up securely." Samson replied, "Well, if I were tied up with new ropes, I would become as weak as anyone else." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him up with them. Delilah cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." But again, Samson snapped the ropes from his arms as if they were threads. Samson was depending on his own strength, not God's. "You have been making fun of me and telling lies. Now tell me, how can you be tied up securely?" Delilah demanded. Samson replied, "Well, if you were to weave the 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on your loom and tighten it with the loom shuttle, I would become as weak as anyone else." As Samson slept, Delilah wove his hair into her loom and tightened it with the pin. Again, she called out to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. God had given Samson the special strength, but Samson was really a self-centered person. How much more might have he done for God if he had only allowed God to use him? Delilah pouted. How can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? You've made fun of me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me what makes you so strong. Delilah kept nagging Samson until he shared his secret with her. My hair has never been cut, he confessed, for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines again, saying, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap, and then she called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. The Philistine rulers came with their money in their hands, and Delilah cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." Now Samson suddenly realized God's power had left him. He was powerless. Delilah just watched Samson go to prison. She did not really love him. Delilah just took all the silver from the leaders and became very rich. How terrible. She did not love God, and she did not really want anything to do with Samson. With his hair cut, now Samson was very weak, and he could not fight back. The Philistines captured him, and they gorged out his eyes. They put him in chains and forced him to grind grain in prison. God had let this happen to Samson because he had not obeyed him and had used his great strength for himself. As Samson was in prison, his hair began to slowly grow back. But more important, Samson's heart began to change. One day, the Philistine rulers had a great festival. They were offering sacrifices and praising their false god, Dagon. They said, "Our God has given us victory over our enemy, Samson." The crowd was half drunk and very loud. They began shouting, "Bring us Samson up out of prison. We want to laugh and make fun of him. We want him to entertain us." So they brought Samson out of prison just so they could jeer him. The crowd told the servant to take Samson up to the big pillars that held up the building. Samson said to the young servant leading him by the hand, "Place my hands against the pillars that hold up the temple. I want to rest them." The temple was full, with about 3,000 people on the roof. Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, please strengthen me just one more time. Let me pay back the Philistines for the loss of my eyes." Then Samson put his hands on the 2 central pillars that held up the temple. Pushing against them with both hands, he prayed, Let me die with the Philistines." God answered his prayer. The temple crashed down on all the Philistine rulers and all the people. So Samson killed more Philistines when he died than he had during his entire lifetime. Samson had judged Israel for 20 years. Samson's story teaches us that it is never too late to start over. Finally, in the end, Samson realized his dependence on God, and God turned his failures into victory. The book of Judges describes a sad period of time in the lives of the children of Israel. The people did not have a strong leader in Samson, so they did not have a strong faith in God. The last sentence in the book of Judges tells why. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The people were not following God. Samson's story is exciting, but it is sad too. Although Samson protected Israel, he didn't always act wisely. His foolish actions caused lots of trouble. Being strong does not make a person wise. Choosing to love and obey God is the way to be wise. Our memory verse is Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Leaning means to put your whole weight against something. We are to trust God like that in every choice we make. God knows what is best, and we should trust His wisdom, not our own. Let's say our verse again. Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Let's pray. Father, help us to learn some important lessons from Samson. Help us remember to use the gifts and talents you have given to us for your glory. Help us not to waste time by being selfish, and help us to be good leaders and good examples in our homes and at school. Help us to be faithful followers of you, Jesus, and make good choices. In your name we pray. Amen. Remember, let's be wise and choose to love and obey God.